What is up, guys? Welcome to Juice Podcast. My name is Salman Ali at Salman Ali on Twitter. Here joined by Craig Ackerman. Craig, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. It's been a while since we talked. The NBA season is, or the Houston Rockets season rather, is 2 days away. I am about as excited I've been for a Rocket season in probably 3 or 4 years. It's been a while since I've been this excited for Rocket season because it feels like this season is different in a lot of ways. It feels like this season is important in a lot of ways. It feels like this season is kind of predictive in a lot of ways for the Rockets long term. So I am very excited to do this with you. Every year we do kind of an episode before the season where we kind of
Right.
pre
Pretty much, yeah.
yeah, observations, stuff like that. And we can still talk about preseason observations, but I figure we kind of throw away that format this year and kind of I'm just going to ask you some questions. And
You're the boss. This is
hey,
your show. So
yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Listen, I feel like this year so I wrote my season preview for RedNationHoops.com. I had some questions on there. I took a lot of those questions, but I also threw in some other ones based on the preseason. You can throw in your preseason observations in your answers to these questions, but I feel like this will kind of help us kind of gauge where we are on the Rockets this season, and we'll end with an actual win total prediction. So I'm going to put you on the spot at the end to come up with some sort of
well,
win.
I'll go ahead and let you know in advance. I'm not real big on picking the actual win totals here, so I probably won't give you an actual number, but I'll answer that question first in saying yes, I do think this team is going to be significantly improved this season.
Okay, okay. I'll figure out a way to ask you that at the end.
Okay.
Okay, in a way that you can answer it. Okay.
Fair
Okay.
enough. Fair enough.
All right. So how about this? What is like a reasonable goal for the Houston Rockets this season? Like, can this team, can they make a play-in tournament? Can they compete for one? Where are you on kind of like placing a goal for them this year, internally and externally?
Well, okay. Well. First of all, I mean, look, the Rockets just played the Pacers in the opener of their preseason, right? And Indiana a season ago made a jump from one season to the next, a 10-win improvement, right? That's a pretty significant leap in this league from one year to the next, especially with teams that have kind of are building towards something, right? Not necessarily competing for the chip, but they're building towards something. So I think as a baseline, I think ultimately if this team did have a 10 plus win improvement in them, I think that would be considered successful just based on how difficult ultimately that is. And again, I'll kind of circle back to what you said you were going to ask me at the end, and then I said I wasn't going to answer originally. I think whatever that ends up being, and we've been talking about this, and everybody around the Rockets have been talking about this now for 3+ years. Ultimately, I do think that that ceiling, whatever that ceiling is, and I think there are obviously can be potentially a lot of wide ranging possibilities in terms of what their ceiling is going to be based on how the season goes and how other teams fare and whether or not other teams have significant injuries. So we just got a pretty big one with Memphis and Steven Adams being out for the entire season because of knee surgery. That is a huge loss for the Memphis Grizzlies. They need him, and they don't have anybody else on their team who can do what he does. That is a big loss for the Memphis Grizzlies. So that right up before even the regular season starts, I mean, you got a team within your own division that has a major injury to deal with. But I ultimately think that that ceiling will be achieved by how much better the young guys ultimately get from last year to this year. Year three for both Jalen and Sengun. And I think I talked about this a little bit in the game the other night against Miami. Year two for Jabari and Tari. Rookie seasons for Men Thompson and Cam Whitmore. I think ultimately what the veterans will do is that they're going to put a floor in place. And because of those guys and their experience level and their talent level and the new coaching staff, the floor of this team is going to get raised. Now, where the ceiling is going to be, I don't know ultimately, but I still think it comes down to the young guys and their improvement. But if this team is able to make a leap like the Pacers did last year, I think that would ultimately be considered a success because I think that would mean that this group is trending in the right direction.
So let's talk about that floor that these veterans are going to add, right? These veteran additions that you talked about. Obviously, Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks, Jeff Green, Jock Landale. Rockets made some key veteran additions this summer, spent a lot of money. And obviously they had the money to spend. They were always planning on spending it. But it does seem like they made a very concerted effort to focus on the defensive end of the floor. And that's probably if I were to say where these veteran additions are going to help the most, it's definitely going to be the defensive end of the floor. And when you talk about raising the floor for this team, I think you're talking about getting them, to an adequate level defensively, and wherever the young guys can make strides offensively, that's probably what we're talking about in terms of what can they achieve their ceiling outcomes. Is that kind of where you're
Well,
at?
yeah, yeah, for sure. And like, I mean, we talked with Dylan Brooks. He's an All NBA caliber um, defender. Fred VanVleet is as much of a disruptive presence on the ball as there is in the league. We've kind of already seen that for a guy who's on the small side. Needless to say, he's super disruptive on ball.
And he
And
fights.
then
He fights through everything.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm sure we'll probably get around to how he helps this team offensively and calms things down a little bit. But defensively, he's super disruptive. Comes up with as many deflections and steals as anybody in the league at that position. I believe you and I have talked about. And I know you've mentioned this, and I've discussed it, and on both the game broadcast and various forums. Um, the, a lot of frustration with the Rockets defense was placed on what people thought that Alp was doing or not doing defensively on the back line. But what did him no now, does he need to improve defensively? Absolutely 100%. Now, if what he's shown so far in the preseason means improvement, then he's significantly improved. Not to mention the coaches are using him differently, which I think plays into his strengths a little bit better now than what was previously done. But it looks like he's ready to take that step. But if you can't stop the ball, right? If you can't defend the point of attack, I mean, unless maybe you have Akeem Olajuwon or Anthony Davis back there, or Bill Russell or something, it's still going to be very difficult on those bigs behind you to clean up dribble penetrations and 2-on-1s, 3-on-2s as teams come into the lane. It's just at this level, it's just very difficult to defend that. So the Rockets' point of attack defense is dramatically improved with VanVleet and Dylan Brooks, and Dylan's intensity. He probably stepped over the line a little bit in his first outing with the Pacers, but I think within that first 4.5 minutes, you saw how much of a disruptive force he can be, and it does appear through the preseason that ultimately is what he's going to sort of lean on, is really making sure that he is a defensive anchor for this group. And so, yeah, I mean, I think and then the natural growth. I mean, I think Jabari Smith, with his length and athleticism, has the ability to be an excellent weak side shot blocker. Again, Sengun led the team in those stocks here in the preseason. A lot of people confuse Alp to be a bit of a plotter. He's not. He's actually more athletic than a lot of people give him credit for. But he was able to, he was hedging a lot, but he was able to recover and block shots. And so the philosophy, the personnel is different this year. And yes, I think ultimately, because this team's defense will be drastically improved, and again, how much, I don't know, but if they can play at least average defense, this is going to be a much more competitive team than what we've seen.
Yeah. So the way I describe like coaching in the NBA, it's tough to talk about, but because it's very tough to gauge, especially if you're not in there for everything, right? But when you have a subpar coaching performance, it does feel like you're starting the game with like a 7 point disadvantage, right? And I feel like an adequate coaching job is like you're not giving up anything, right? A great coaching job is like you're starting the game, which like I think of the Heat like this, right? They start the game with like a 7 to 8 point advantage because they're just gonna find things during the game. They're gonna get just for trying hard, they're gonna find 7 points, 8 points, whatever. And you're already in a hole when you as soon as you start the game because they're trying harder than you. They're hustling harder than you. They're finding opportunities that you're not finding, right? I feel like they have a legitimate chance to get like a 3 or 4 point advantage in some of these games. The way they're trying in the preseason, I mean, they're really going all out, especially on the defensive end of the floor for some of these preseason games. And I feel like that's going to translate. And when I talk about the difference kind of from maybe the last regime to this regime, like it does feel like both regimes maybe came into the roster with biases, right? Like they have that's natural. Humans always have biases. Like I think this player is best at this. I think this player is weak at this. I think whatever, right? That happens. But what I've noticed from Ime is I see a self-corrective nature with him, right? Like he is willing to like, okay, I was wrong here, or it does feel like he's willing. There's a straight shooterness to this, right? Like and like I'm just gonna evaluate the talent I see. Obviously, I have my biases. I'm not gonna ignore them. I have my hunches. I'm not gonna ignore them. But I'm also gonna like go off of what I'm seeing, what I feel like is right, and like when Sengun got was playing terribly, I think 2 preseason games ago, and he got yanked from the game for just a little bit, right? And Ime had that talk with him. It went viral on Twitter, but I think it's because sometimes the fans are right in noticing some of these things, right? We're always hard on fans for like, oh, you don't know the full story, you don't know, but like sometimes they're right, right? Sometimes they kind of have a good idea of what's going on. I think they were kind of on the nose here in that Ime has a really great approach with this kind of stuff. Talk to the guy, encourage him, get him back into the game. He's having a terrible offensive performance, but that doesn't mean he can't turn it around. If you instill that confidence in him, tell him to slow down, whatever it is, right? Like I think that kind of stuff goes a long way. I think they're going into a lot of these games with an advantage because of that.
Well, what I can tell you is that right off the bat, and we noticed this when we went into training camp for a couple of practices. The practices, there's a little more sense of urgency, and the intensity level in practice is different this season. And in part because, and I talked about this a little bit on one of these last couple of games too, is that this is an actual. Well, I think this is a very good coaching staff, but on top of it all of these guys in some form or fashion played professionally, and you actually find that quite often in the NBA. I mean, you go back to, I mean, just go back to Rick Adelman's coaching staff, right? All of those guys played in the league, and in the case of Jack Sikma, you have a guy who is a Hall of Fame type of guy, right? So, but the difference there and here is that these guys are so much younger. Eventually, they're going to age, right? And they're not, but they kind of just get in the trenches with these guys, right? All the coaches are able to sort of get in there. I mean, Thiago Splitter still looks like he can play. Ben Sullivan, Royal, all these guys look like. I mean, even Ime, they all look like they can still give it a go. Obviously, they can't give it a go at the level of these guys who are in their early 20s, but they look like they're still young enough and in shape enough to kind of give it a go. And so there's a different level sort of intensity with this regime, with this group than there had been in the past. There's also the benefit of hindsight, right? Because a lot of these young guys have been here, right? And you knew they were going to be part of the core, and you have enough tape and eyeballs on them to kind of figure out what they do well and what they don't. The sample size, especially for guys like Sengun and Green, is pretty significant over the course of their 2-year NBA career. And look, and in the case of Sengun with Ime Udoka, I mean, what it was basically, hey, look, we have a ton of confidence in you. You have been struggling offensively in the preseason. It was nice to see him kind of bust out of that in that game the other night against Miami. So that's a positive sign. We have a lot of faith in you. We believe in you. We need you. Just relax, calm down, get back out there. And I think, yes, as a player, naturally, that's going to help you continue to gain confidence in that that obviously there's a point and a level to everything, but that your coach, your head coach, this coaching staff is going to allow you to play through some mistakes and try to learn from them. And again, there's a level to it. I mean, maybe when the regular season starts, if some of these things continue to happen, maybe there won't quite be as much patience as there was in the preseason because they need to win these games now. But yeah, I thought that was a good move by Ime Udoka. We were in San Antonio. It seemed like it was very Greg Popovich like. I mean, at times Pop will bring guys over, give them a hug, tell them something. Other times he just will scream down their neck and throw them back to the end of the bench. So I thought it was appropriate that had occurred in San Antonio as well.
Yeah, it depends on the player too, right? Some players can take that
Right.
yelling, yeah, right, and some players are like, you know what, you need to pull them to the side a little bit and talk to them. And you know, I like how you mentioned that. Like he is not going to be especially punitive to him versus the other players
or anybody.
at the
He's
very
been
least.
blunt.
Yeah.
One thing I have enjoyed, he's been blunt. I mean, look, the
Mhm.
Rockets have had the worst record in the league over the last 3 seasons, and you know that, I know that. The vast majority of people who have been following in this team on any level over the last 3 years knows that. Ime Udoka understands that. He's been very blunt and honest and open, and I think that bluntness and honesty is kind of starting to rub off on the team. We ran a quote the other night with Jalen Green, and Jalen was like, "Hey, I know I can score, I know I can pass, but hey, I got to start winning. I got to be a leader. I got to start playing some defense." I mean, I thought that might have been the best quote I've heard from Jalen Green yet. So blunt, so honest, so he was self-assessing himself. It's a terrible way to phrase it, but you know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. I thought that was a very positive thing, and it does seem like the personality of this group is the coaching staff is rubbing off on this team this year. Not to mention the veteran players too. So
Yeah, so let's talk about Sengun because we did talk about him a couple times. This is I kind of hinted at it. I think he's gonna get a fair shake this year, and I think he's under Ime Udoka, he's being used differently offensively, and I think it's interesting, right? Like he's being used in these dribble handoffs like a lot, and I kind of think it's the right call. Like I think it's for this particular team. I think these dribble handoffs are like a good way to actually use him. He hasn't been very efficient so far in the preseason.
he's missed a lot of those little baby hooks that he
Yeah,
normally
that's
makes. Yeah.
yeah, and but like I kind of think that's gonna correct itself over time. It's not unusual for Sengun to have a bad preseason. He had one last season, last year, and he had a great season, right? So like that's not something that I'm especially worried about. But I think if you can thrive in this situation, you're not maybe you're not the post up hub that a lot of people wanted you to be, but you're in that dribble handoff role. You're being featured offensively, just in a different way that maybe you thought you were going to be. If you can thrive in that, I think you can thrive in any circumstance. So I think as long as that usage is there, it doesn't matter what context it's coming in, as long as it's there, I'm glad he's getting it. I'm glad he's actually being used. That screen setting with him is actually like a real tool that he has. That unselfishness, high post
Screen
passes.
setting is always an undervalued
Yeah,
and underrated skill at this level.
yeah.
If you have a good screen setter on your team, it makes a big
Yeah,
difference.
and especially for a team like this that has a lot of great off the ball movers. Like Van Vliet's a great off the ball mover.
And that's the whole point,
Yeah.
right? That's the whole point with this the ball movement, the more ball movement, the more man movement, and they need cutters. The ball to steal a Kevin McHale phrase, they don't want this ball to get sticky, right?
Hmm.
And they want the ball to move, and they want space and need lanes for these guys to drive, and yeah, it just makes sense.
Yeah, and if he's particularly efficient in this role, like listen, the guys who are asking like, "Hey, why doesn't he get this why isn't he this post hub?" Like which I was for a moment. Like if he's efficient here, he'll be that, right? Like if he's the best he can possibly be here, the coaching staff is not going to hesitate to put him in like more, showcase roles. I'm not concerned about that. I'm actually glad that they're, just more using him in the sets, right? They're like, it's not like he's not like a fallback option, right? He's like, okay, we're initiating the set, maybe not through the post, but through his screen setting with him. And I like that. I like that he's actually being featured like that. And I want, I'm
And they're
interested.
moving Jabari. They're moving Jabari around
Right.
too, and
Hmm.
I mean it's. I mean everybody's moving and cutting and yeah. I mean things are different for sure.
Yeah, it's very very interesting to watch in the preseason. Okay, let's talk about Jalen Green, the other 2021 draft pick still on this team. If so, there's a lot of people. The conversation around him has been so centered on this third year leap going into the season, right? Third year leap, third year leap, third year leap, right? Like Jack Lowe writes this big article on him. We're all really focused on him, and like here's my thing. I When you look at the one and done players, right? Third year leaps, like, yes, players get better in their third year, but that leap into stardom, that usually, especially the players that Jalen Green, the archetype that he falls under, the Zach Levines, the Bradley Beals, the Devin Bookers, those types of shooting guards, those guys usually make the leap into stardom like their fourth or fifth year. I think I think there's a real possibility that he takes a step forward this year, like he gets better. but perhaps it's not into that stardom territory. And like I think people who are expecting that, like shouldn't be disappointed if that happens. But I'll ask you this: if Jalen makes a leap, but it's not necessarily the leap, is that an acceptable outcome for this
Yes.
team?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. I agree. No, no. Like I think I agree with a little bit of all you said, and I agree with the people because I've been one of them that there is a lot of importance for him and frankly for Shingun and frankly for anybody in the league to sort of figure out and find. There are always exceptions to the rule, right? There are always exceptions to the rule, but normally guys get their footing and their ultimate path forward for the rest of their careers in many respects is defined by the time they're in the league through 3 years. Now, do I think that, well, if this guy doesn't make an all NBA team this year, or he's not an all-star, then that's not a leap. No, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I do think this is that it's important that he takes that leap, as is the case with Shingun, again being in their 3rd years in the league. But from an organizational perspective, it's important because you got to try to make some decisions, right,
Hmm.
on future money, right? And so, from an organizational perspective, you would like to see him continue to get better and uh, hopefully significantly leap forward from 1 year to the next. Maybe not again. No, you don't have to put the pressure on him being all star this year. But if he's going that way, then you feel a lot better as an organization continuing to invest in a player like this long term. As a fan, as an observer, you get more confident in knowing that you have a true building block piece that will help you ultimately get back to the playoffs and hopefully beyond after that. So I think it's a little bit of a above for him, all the above for him. But it is an important year. Again, I mentioned that quote that we ran, and I think there was that interview from Media Day that he had with Vanessa. But I thought it was a very honest and open response by him. He assessed the areas I think we all knew that he needed to get better at. Defensively, leadership qualities. What was the third thing? Now I remember. I said it earlier. Now I forget. Boy, now I'm drawing a blank, even though I just mentioned it about 5 minutes ago. But anyhow, I thought it was a very honest assessment of himself, and he understands it. And I think I hope that this staff can get some of that more out of him. I mean, he's playing more off ball. He's moving a lot more than what we've seen. Didn't have a great first couple of games out the gates, but that's okay. Then had the toe injury, and that was very painful for him. So it was nice to see him come out and look as confident and fluid as he did against the Heat. Because again, going back to the very start of this show, what I've repeated many, many, many times, ultimately the ceiling of this team this year will be defined, I think, in large part by how much better both Alp and Jalen Green are this season.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. I think so too. And you mentioned how they have to make some decisions with them. Like, yeah, that's 100% true. Like they have to make some real, especially with the new CBA. They have to be very intentional in how they spend their money. But you do have some time, right? Like you don't
No,
have
no, right, right.
right. Yeah,
You have time for sure.
you're right.
But and again, if he continues down the path and takes and becomes a more well-rounded
Hmm.
player in the league this season, I think that then he's a pretty polarizing guy, right? I mean,
Hmm.
in terms of NBA observers. But if he can become there's never been a doubt or denying the kid has so much talent. Like he's oozing with basketball talent. I mean, it's crazy how talented he really is. But if he can develop into a more well-rounded guy, that again ultimately does lead to his team winning more, I think the narrative around him changes, and then ultimately people feel a lot more comfortable about him. And then I think you can see a true path forward for this team on into the next couple of years and growing into a playoff team again. So we'll just have to wait and see how it plays out.
What I'm most interested with him this year are like there's two things that I'm watching for. Like one is obviously the defense, right? Like the defense, I think he really does have to get better here, like to become like a net positive NBA player, much less that leap into stardom, right? Like I think he needs to just do that to be someone that's consistently
Yeah,
helping.
one step at a
Right.
time.
Yeah. Like I think that I think Ime is going to really help there, and Van Vliet, and frankly, is going to help there. Not only in just isolating him from the tougher assignments, but helping him as a teacher, helping him watch film. Like Van Vliet's like an a famous, excuse me, film watcher, right? He watches a ton of film. It's why he's gotten so much better throughout the course of his career. He really pays attention to those little details. I think getting those habits ingrained into Jalen Green early is a good thing. I think it's going to help him, especially on the defensive end of the floor. Um, Second thing I'm watching for with him, pick and roll. So in the preseason, it really does seem like the Rockets and Ime Udoka kind of talked about this at media day. They want him to be this really well-rounded offensive talent, right? They're not just someone that's going to score a bunch of points, but a guy who's going to be kind of, you know, I don't. Ime didn't say this, but he kind of hinted at it, right? Could be your initiator, right, of offense, right? And seeing him operate in the pick and roll, I saw a couple plays with him with Alperen Sengun in those early preseason games. Um, and him dropping some nice dimes, him doing some kick out passes, like that. That kind of stuff is so important for him to develop long term, as just to become one of those guys. If that's his eventual goal, which I'm sure it is, he needs to really work on that. It was not a strength of his coming out of the G League Ignite, but I think it can be something that he's good at. He's just never had to use a screen. I've said this before. He's so fast, like off the dribble. So now that he's having to use it and he's having to make more of these reads, it's interesting to watch him develop as a passer. Watch him develop to defenses adjusting to him, stepping up. Doing various pick and roll coverages with him. Um, Film watching is going to help there too, but also just that those reps are going to help there. Seeing him get these reps this year are going to be pretty interesting. I'm really gonna have some fun breaking down these numbers with him in the pick and roll as the ball handler. I think he's actually a much better passer than he's kind of talked about. Like I think
He
he's
was very much improved last year over his rookie
oh
season.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think his rookie season was actually improved from the G League. Like the G League, I really didn't think of much of him as a passer. Then he comes in his rookie year and he adds dump off passes to his game, right? Then his sophomore year, he adds these kick out passes to his game. And if he can start adding these passes out of pick and roll to his game, like that's really going to be another step that he can take forward as the initiator that the Rockets want him to be. And I think that's something that I really I think those two things, the defense and the pick and roll operability, I think those are really going to be important areas of his game that need to improve for him to really take those steps forward.
No, I agree for sure. I mean, and again, pick and roll is the bread and butter of basketball, right?
Hmm.
And teams who can, if you can execute on pick and rolls, then you're going to be that much more efficient offensively. Not to mention, it just creates opportunities for pick and pops, drives, depending upon defensive coverages, drives and kicks, right? Allowed you to get those paint touches and then the kick out to guys who are open on the perimeter. It just opens up all kinds of things.
Yeah. So let's talk about the guy who's made probably the most headlines of the Rockets preseason, Jabari Smith. Jabari has been a treat to watch. From summer league onwards, he has been having him like his confidence is back. His Auburn confidence, Auburn Jabari was extremely confident, like a big time S talker, a big time, you know, a guy who exuded confidence, right? Knew what he was good at, did it exceptionally well. But um, one of the criticisms I had with him coming out of college is like he's kind of robotic and he's kind of the ball handling needs a lot of work, right? And that's kind of why I wouldn't take him maybe at the top end of the draft. I was a Holmgren and a Bankero guy, right? I was like, I liked those guys as ball handlers better than Jabari, but I liked him at that third spot. Now, watching him in the summer league, um, he has clearly taken a step forward as a ball handler. That's translated to the preseason. He's not as robotic as he used to be. He's much more field driven versus kind of I'm going to do this cheat code over and over and over again because it worked at the college level, right? Like I like that he's actually reading the game a little bit more and seeing him kind of take more of an onus offensively is fun. It's fun. Like he's running the court with the ball a lot of times, taking top of the key threes. Like he did in college, but this time off the dribble. Right in college, he was taking it as a trailer. This time, he's taking it off the dribble, which I think if he has that in his game, like where he can just take pull up jumpers, grab and go like that, sky's the limit with this kid. Sky's the
It's all,
limit.
and you mentioned his confidence. I think the confidence is just. I mean, he's got the size over time. He's filling out, and he will continue to fill out. Right. I mean, he came into the league as a 19-year-old, so that was to be expected. But it's all about confidence. I mean, this is a tough league, man. There's a lot of pressures on you. This is the best league in the world. I think there's as much talent at this level in this league now than as there's ever been. I mean, just look how, I mean, just look how deep and talented all the teams in the West are. Even the teams who are going to be at the bottom of the standings, and then many people are including the Rockets in that category. Look how much better the Rockets are now than they have been with their overall talent level. There's just so much talent in this league, and I think that actually started, in that Indiana game in March of last year, where he had a monster second half, helped bring the team back, hit that big shot to force overtime. Now, the Rockets ended up losing. Halliburton was a monster that night, and he is a monster, and the Rockets ended up losing that game. But from that point forward, the last month of Jabari's season was so much better than it was over. It has some ups and downs, but he was consistently playing at a good level over the last month. Then what we saw in summer league, I mean, the guy was just way too good to play in the summer league. Did his thing over a couple of games, then sat out and watched the rest of it, as was the case with Tari. I mean, Tari's just way too good, obviously, too, to play in the summer league. And then he's been the Rockets' best and most consistent player in the preseason. So all these things are very encouraging signs that your young players who are going to be part of this foundation, regardless of what veterans have been brought in and what veterans will ultimately continue to be here on into the future, you need these foundational pieces who you drafted and the reason why you went through this process in the first place to continue to develop and get better. And I think he's obviously his arc is headed upward, and I'm excited about it.
Yeah, yeah. I think listen, like there's a reason these scouts get paid the money that they do. I was talked into putting Jabari at 3. I didn't want to, right? Like I'll be very frank about that. I really like Jaden Ivey. I was thinking about it, and with Jabari, like my hand,
I'm like the last dude to ask. I think
yeah.
I hardly ever watch college basketball, and so I'm like the last guy to ask about
Oh
how
no,
those guys translate to the next level.
no, right. I'm just more talking this through right now, and I remember like consistently the scouts would tell you this is a guy. This is a guy. Like this is the guy that belongs in the conversation with Holmgren and Boncaro. He is special. Look how young he is. Look how great of a kid he is. That's the you kept on hearing that. He's a great kid, hard worker. Kept on hearing that. Great kid, hard worker. It's like, yeah, but you would say that about anybody. Like you always hear that. Oh, he's a great kid. Who's a bad kid? When do you ever hear that, right? So so
True,
right, like so you kept hearing
but
that.
it is very much true in his circumstance for sure.
Right. No, yeah, and like that's it's very clear that the hard worker stuff is real. Like he makes significant improvements to his game every single year. He takes criticism in head on. I like Jalen does that too, by the way. Jalen's a guy who takes that in really well, and I think addresses it properly. He's built out his body, by the way, really really well. Jalen, he really skinny his rookie year versus what he is now. But yeah, back to Jabari. Um, you kept on hearing he's a great kid. So I was like, okay, screw it. I'll put him at 3. But I had my hangups and like, yeah, there's a reason, man. Like these guys get paid a lot of money to do this, and like when they identify talent, it's usually because there's something there, right? When there's something, uh, you know, externally or internally there that within the player that they believe that this guy deserves this specific spot, this specific ranking. And with Jabari, man, like I see it now. Like I really do. I'm starting to see the high end outcomes for him. I'm still kind of conservative with him as a projection guy. Like I just think I'd rather prefer always project the median outcome, right? But even the median outcomes are pretty damn good, and it's encouraging. Like so much of his game is confidence driven, but when his confidence is moving, like he really really looks good. He really really looks good.
Yeah, yeah, it looks like he's taken another step. So again, very, very positive.
So I want to talk about Amen Thompson because Amen. So I wrote this in my season preview column, which I normally do after the preseason, but I was like, screw it. I'm gonna be brave. I'm gonna write the season preview column before the preseason starts. And what I had in there was Amen Thompson is going to be in the rookie of the year race. He is going to be in the rookie of the year race. And the reason I said that is I don't care the team context. Yes, he's coming off the bench. Yes, Van Vliet and Green and perhaps others are going to be in front of him in the rotation. I understand all that. I think his athleticism and his brain, more importantly, are going to be so ahead of the curve that it's going to negate a lot of this. And I think the Rockets are going to take a real step forward this year, and I think he's going to be a big part of it. And I think more specifically, as a second unit hub guy, I think he's really going to be someone who pushes the Rockets forward. His passing is, I mean, it's really really next level. I mean, a lot of people were worried about this stuff at the Ignite, right? Like not the Ignite, excuse me, the Overtime Elite, where guys would drop passes from him, right? And they're like, "Oh, he's turnover prone." It's like, no, I just think those guys weren't ready for the passes. I think NBA players are going to be ready for these passes, right? I think he's like throwing passes that these kids aren't ready for, and that's fine. But NBA players are going to be ready for it, and you're seeing it, right? And you're seeing how quick he is, how strong he is for his frame. He has a wiry frame, but he's strong and he maneuvers people really well. His second step is actually underrated. Like, yeah, of course he has a great first step. His second step's great too, and usually, like, you see talented defender him getting past talented defenders with that first step, and those defenders are normally used to being like, okay, I can recover here, right? He got past me, I can come from behind, maybe make step my body back a little bit, and I'll get the positioning to contest this shot well enough. He'll get past them again on the second step, and they're gone. He's at the basket. He's dunking.
He's impressive.
Yeah,
He's impressive. He's a very,
yeah.
very impressive talent. I was super impressed with him when he was introduced after he was drafted. And then, albeit it was only for 3+ quarters in one summer league game, but I was like, this, and I just admitted, I have admitted for years that I don't watch a ton of college basketball. I watch 0 seconds of overtime elite, right? 0 seconds. And I know a lot of the criticism of that league is that he was playing against a bunch of 15-year-old kids, right? With no disrespect to the 15-year-old kids, but I watched 0 seconds of overtime elite. So I really didn't know a ton about him. By the way, his brother's really good too. He's impressive. I think he's going to be really, really good for a very long time in this league. I mean, still, the proof is in the pudding. We'll wait to see whether or not he can ultimately become a reliable perimeter threat. To reach a certain level in this league, you need to have that in your bag. We've seen his mechanics are a lot better now than they had been in terms of his shooting. You would think that ultimately, with mechanics and reps and experience and time, that more of those shots are going to drop. He's another one of those guys who's known for his ability to just live in a gym and always want to get better. So that's a very positive attribute. He's an impressive person. He's an impressive talent. And I think he's going to be really, really good for a very long time. And again, this was knowing I knew basically nothing about him or his brother after playing in that league. And I think he's going to be good. I mean, he does have tremendous size. You mentioned he's very cerebral. He doesn't seem to get rattled. He's very poised, which are things you need from guys who kind of dominate the ball. I think he's going to have a very good career.
Yeah, there were concerns about how he's going to function in a half court setting, right? And I shared some of those concerns, right? Because the OTE was very fast break driven, and it's what made part of that league hard to really watch, right? But in terms of how he's translated that poise into the NBA game, it's aiding him in in those half court settings. It really is. The jump shot you talked about, right? Like, so with him, the worry with him that the mechanics were obviously pretty bad and needed some work, and they've gotten better. It's still a bit robotic, and it's going to take some time for him to really get to his final form as a shooter, right? Whatever that ultimately is, we're going to find out. It's tough to really say right now. Um, but what I like about him is the form is robotic, but he's still shooting it instinctually, right? Like, it's like, okay, I'm open, I'm gonna shoot it. No hesitation, done. I'm gonna take it. I like that. Take the shot.
Well, you need to do if you got an open shot in this league, especially a three, then I mean, if you're going to win, you need to take them and make them.
And the mid-range jumpers. He's taking the like I like that. Like there's no hesitation. There's no fear to get to the free throw line. There's no, oh, this is a weak area in my game, so I'd rather not take it. Even Shengun, an ultra confident fellow himself, has hesitation taking three-pointers, right? With a man, there's none of that. He's just like, I'm gonna shoot it. I have to get better here. I'm gonna keep taking these reps. I'm working on this on the side. I'm gonna try in the live game setting. And I've talked about how hard it is to translate jump shot mechanics from a practice setting to a live game setting before. But he you have to do it, right? To you have to like try it, right? You have to at least like attempt to, get out of your comfort zone and do it. And there's no hesitation there. There's a lot of comfort there. There's a lot of confidence there. There's a lot of swagger there. And yeah, you know,
He's going to be a defensive monster too.
yeah,
So, I mean, just his instincts again, the cerebral nature in which he plays the game, and then just his frame. Like he's going to be a really good defender too. So,
yeah,
when I saw him play in that first summer league game, I was like, wow, this young man's very impressive. And again, so too is his brother. His brother looks pretty darn good for Detroit.
no, yeah, for sure. And like that first game, that first preseason game wasn't so great, but it's like again, no drop in confidence. Comes back and he has a great game. That's what you'd like to see. I really think he's gonna make this a dark. I think he's gonna be a dark horse in this rookie of the year conversation. I know there are a lot of great rookies this year. There are a lot of people that are gonna be in that race. I think he's gonna make some noise. I think he's gonna be maybe he may not win the award. I think he's gonna be in the race. I think he's gonna be a real contender for it because I think he's that talented. Let's move on to another rookie though, Cam Whitmore. So Tari Eason went down with a lower leg injury. I can't remember. I
Yeah,
think it
it's
was.
like a contusion of some kind. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I know it's got to be killing him. And I'm outside of his mom. I'm very much on the list of the Tari Eason fan club. So I'm a huge fan of him and his game.
Oh, it's hard not to be. It's hard not to be. I'm looking forward to seeing how he progresses this year too. Don't think just because he's not on the rundown that I'm not looking forward to what he does this year. Um, but he went down for the next 2 or 3 weeks. And now there's an opening in the rotation, right? Now there's an opening for minutes to be had. And those are clearly going to be taken up by Cam Whitmore. And it's interesting to
Yeah,
see.
I don't know if that's not necessarily the case. I think maybe Jay Sean Tate might have an ability to play some minutes there too, depending upon the team's needs. I mean, I think based on the way Cam played in the summer league as the MVP in the start of the preseason, that was the case. Kind of tailed off a little bit with his efficiency. I think he's going to be a really really good player too. I think it ultimately just kind of depends upon what the team needs, right? If they need someone to go out there and just look to put the ball in the bucket, then I think Cam is certainly one guy they're going to look towards. I think it'll be interesting to see how he is ultimately used. And I really don't think it's going to be any sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? The book, if for some reason he's out of the rotation to start the season, I don't think that's not going to be indicative of ultimately how. I know they really like him, but if that's the case at the start of the year, then ultimately I just think that's just going to be, sorry, someone's at the doorbell.
No, you're okay.
I thought I had that on mute. I think that's ultimately going to if he's not in the starting or in the rotation rather to start the year, then I don't think that's going to be any sort of. It's not going to be indicative of how they feel about him or what his future is going to be. It's just there's a lot of guys here, and they may be looking to get some other things that other guys who have already been here, veteran players, can bring to the table that he has not yet. But he's crazy talented, and as much as I miss not having KJ Martin on the team for his wow factor, Cam Whitmore certainly brings that. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, and it's not so much. I don't think Jay Sean is like. Of course, I think Jay Sean is probably safely ahead of him in the rotation, but I still think there's going to be minutes to be had with Tari down. And I think that vacuum is going to be filled by. This is what I think, right? I just suspect that it's going to be filled by Cam, and what I'm interested to see is in that 2 to 3 week period. This kind of reminds me of Josh Christopher actually, his rookie year. I did not think Josh Christopher was going to be in the rotation. I thought he was going to be a G League guy the entire year. He forced his way there.
Tari Eason did the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very much so through the preseason. Through summer league, through preseason, through the beginning of the season, he forced his way in there, and I kind of think Cam might force. Is I think Cam's going to force his way in there for those 2 or 3 week period, for that 2 or 3 week period at least. Now, what I'm interested in knowing is, and it's impossible to. I actually don't know. October 22nd, what's going to happen. What hap- What happens when Tari returns at that point? Will he actually stay? I suspect no, he goes back to the bench, he goes back to G League, whatever. That's kind of what I suspect, but I don't know, and I don't know how well Cam's going to perform in this 2 to 3 week period. And it's tough to know without knowing that. It's tough to know how these other guys are going to perform either. Jay Sean Tate, um, Dylan Brooks, these other forwards in the rotation ahead of him, how those guys perform is also
Yeah,
going to
how
be.
many guys? Oh, we don't really know yet how many guys ultimately are going to make up Ime Udoka's rotation, right? I
Right.
mean, my personal philosophy on this is that it does become very difficult to consistently play 10 guys every single night. I think more or less it's
I'm
more
with you.
like nine
Yeah.
and a half. So it's gonna be, we'll have to wait and see, because when people say, well, all these guys should be playing, then the counter to that is, and frankly, this was an argument that Mike D'Antoni made all the time too. Was okay, that's fine. I mean, I like this guy. I think he has really good qualities. I think he can play, but you want me to take minutes away from so and so to give one of my best players to give that. So I think the balancing act of that is going to be interesting. Like the way Cam started the preseason was like, well, there's no way this guy is not going to be not seeing minutes, right, with this team. But we'll see. I don't know how deep that rotation is. We'll find out in Orlando and San Antonio to start the year. We'll see how tight that the coaching staff wants to play that, and I think that will determine some things. Especially when Tari comes back, because Tari is 100% part of that rotation. But Cam Whitmore is another young man, 19 years old, who doesn't look it. He's built like a rock. He's already got an NBA body. So explosive, incredibly confident, has the instincts and the skills and the body type to be a really good defender on top of everything else. So yeah, I'm very. I don't know how he fell to 20, like pretty much everybody said, but he did, and I'm very happy about him being on this team.
No, he is. I've talked about like I'll never understand why he fell 20. Like no, there's no explanation I've heard yet that's been sufficient for me, right? Where I'm like, no, like no, that doesn't make any sense because X, Y, and Z, right? And where where I land with this is he is kind of someone that the Rockets don't let me. I'm going to be very clear about this. I'm not saying it is always going to remain the case. As of now, the Rockets don't need this guy long term, but they love having him long term. Like this fell into their lap. I believe they were thinking about trading that pick on draft night and moving up or perhaps moving out. And I think this is one of those opportunities that just fell into their lap, and they're happy to have it. And I think with because of that, because he's so young, he was one of the younger players in the draft. He because of what the Rockets have in front of him, they can kind of afford to play the patience game with him, and that's fine,
Yeah, no, if this was like a year or two ago, this guy would be playing all the time.
right? Yeah,
But the team is different. The situation is different. The roster is different. So,
yeah,
well, yeah.
yeah, no,
But I think he's going to be. I think he's going to be good. I think he's going to be very good.
no, yeah, for sure. And but I say that to say like even if he doesn't, if Tari comes back and he gets kicked out of the rotation, I think that's fine. I think that's fine. Like I think that has nothing to do with what the Rockets think about him long term.
Yeah,
I just think
for sure.
they can afford to do it that way. But his strong preseason play is impressive. It is fun to watch. I'm really upset that dunk got overturned. But it
And then he had the alley oop where he got fouled against Miami, where he and Amen Thompson also have really good chemistry, right? I mean, it was like they
mhm.
were coming down the floor and they just kind of made eye contact with one another, and they knew exactly what they wanted to do with it. And If he would have completed that one too, that would have been super impressive. But yeah, the dunk at San Antonio, yeah, oh, um, yeah, that was awesome. But yeah, but I'm just like you said, I was just bummed that KJ wasn't back on the team for that factor because I think KJ was so much fun to watch because he was just looking to dunk everything, and I like the fact that there's several of these players still on the team. And then Thompson has that kind of athleticism. Jalen Green, the same thing, and Cam Whitmore sort of brings that KJ Martin role. At least for me personally, when I'm sitting there working and watching all these games of the guy who you're just expecting something crazy to happen when he's on the floor.
Right. Yeah. It's he's fun. He's a really really fun player. It's crazy that those two got drafted on the same team. That's it's ridiculous. Okay. Uh, you may not do a win total prediction. I did it last year. I'm going to do it again. I have it down as 35. I wrote it down in the season preview. I think they're going to win 35 games. Last year, I thought they were going to win 30 games. I way overshot it. Looking back at it, I think I probably would have reset that to 28 if I had to do it again. Um, but I don't think I don't think I was on the wrong track. I think they underachieved a little bit to some extent last season. This year, I think they've added significant veteran talent, in Van Vliet, Dylan Brooks. I think they're going to get some leaps from some of the young guys. And I think that's enough for, in my opinion, to see about a 13-win jump, right? I think that's fair. From my perspective,
I think that's fair.
yeah,
I think that's fair.
yeah, and I think you're looking at the 12th seed in the Western Conference, and I think you know they battle for the play-in race. They don't make it, but doesn't mean it's a disappointing season. That's kind of where I end up. Um, so
I guess going back to your original point too, what would you consider a success? You just kind of reminded me of something. If they're playing meaningful competitive games in March and on into early April, and whether that means competitive games trying to fight for a playing spot, or maybe even beyond that, if a lot of things break their way. But if they're playing competitive games in the last 6 weeks of the season, this season, regardless how they ultimately finish up, should be viewed as a success.
So I'm not going to ask you about a win total prediction. I told you I was going to go around it. To reach their whatever you view as their highest end outcomes. Can you give me a specific item that will help them reach there? It can't just be like the young players going off. Like obviously that I could say that, right?
Right, right,
A
right.
specific item like, okay, if this happens, they can reach their highest end outcomes.
From what we've seen, this team has struggled with over the last 3 years. There's several core areas in which they really struggle. Defense, right? Defense, transition defense. They look much better in both of those areas through the preseason. We'll see how that translates to the regular season. But at least all we have to go on at this point, they look to be much better in those areas. I know that from time to time they've had some turnover issues in the preseason, but I do think they're going to be better with their ball security. I don't. It doesn't look like they're going to be as fanatical when it comes to crashing the offensive glass as they were. They were the best offensive rebounding team in the last week. Maybe some of that's a little more. There's a little more trade off with wanting to make sure they don't get beat as badly as they have the last 3 years in terms of the transition defense. With all that said, all that still needs to come together, right? All that still needs to come together. But if you're asking me one thing that we haven't discussed yet, that I still think is a major question mark, is shooting.
Mhm.
If you can't shoot, you can't consistently shoot in this league, especially from three, you're not going to win at a high level, period. That's just the way the sport is played, and this is who you're competing against. I still have some concerns about where and how much improved this team is going to be shooting wise. Again, you're playing a lot of different guys in the preseason. So when things go well in the preseason, including myself, everybody wants to jump on board and talk about how great it is and say this is translating to the season. And when things don't go well, you gloss over it and say, it's just the preseason. They did not shoot the ball well from the perimeter in the preseason. Fred VanVleet had his worst shooting season of his career last year, but historically speaking, he's a very good three-point shooter. So hopefully he returns to what he's been for the vast majority of his career. Dylan Brooks has struggled to shoot the ball from the perimeter the last couple of years with the Memphis Grizzlies. Shot amazingly well for Team Canada in the World Cup. Now, that level of shooting from him, or frankly anybody, would be unfair to ask for during the season. But can Dylan Brooks get back to where he was earlier in his career in terms of shot making from the perimeter instead of low 30s? Just if he can get back to league average, I think that would help dramatically. Jabari Smith, a guy who came into the league touted for his ability to shoot the ball. If he can continue to get more consistent, right, and shoot league average or slightly better, that will certainly help. The jury is still out on Sengun's ability to knock down threes, and his confidence to take them, as we've already discussed and we've seen. I think that's very important. Can Jalen Green become a more efficient shooter from the perimeter? So to me, the thing that I think I and everybody really needs to keep an eye on this season, because this league in so many ways is determined by how well you defend 3-point shooting and or how you make 3-point shots. To me, we'll have to wait and see. And I think if they do improve their shooting, then I think the ceiling that we've been discussing is higher. If they don't, then perhaps maybe it's a little bit lower than we were expecting, because it's the most important skill in the sport. And to me, that's probably right now, that's the one area that I'm really interested in seeing where this team shakes out as the season goes on. Can they become a reliable, consistent league average or maybe slightly below league average 3-point shooting team? Then I think ultimately this team's level of success will be greater than maybe what most people are anticipating.
Love that answer. Love that answer. And they've added some guys that are going to help them in that department. Obviously, Van Vliet. Obviously, Jabari is the hope is he takes a step forward. Aaron Holiday is a very good shooter. I'm not sure how much he's going to play necessarily to impact the team's 3-point percentage, but he is someone who can
He
capably shoot
can
three.
low volume, but he's good.
Yeah, yeah, he's a very good he's a very good shooter. I also think excuse me, Reggie Bullock was a very helpful addition for them, spacing the floor wise. He's someone who's a little bit streaky. Often starts the season off slow.
Very slow.
Yeah,
He's not a good season starter.
yeah. But in the long term, he does usually turn it around and end on a strong note. So you might see one of those 45% from three stretches to close the year. But hey, that helps. That helps you get there as a
Like
team.
Alex Bregman, right? Right. He's not a real good season starter.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, these additions are gonna help, and Jalen Green getting, better as a 3-point shooter is gonna help. Alperen Sengun, if I see one more possession of this guy on synergy, pump faking and driving again, I'm gonna throw my remote at my laptop screen. I don't wanna see it anymore. I don't wanna shoot the three, shoot the ball. I love you, Alp. No one loves you more than me. No one knows, no one's a bigger fan than me. Don't stop doing that. Stop doing that. Take the shot. Um, but yeah, that needs to happen. But a couple things need to happen here and there, but it's doable. There are avenues for this team to get better defensively. A lot of it's from the young players, a lot of it's from the additions, but uh, the greatest step they can take forward as a team is obviously limiting the turnovers and taking a step forward as a 3-point shooting team. And if they can do that, then I think 35 wins very much on the table, higher than that on the table as well.
Yeah, double digit win total this season would be that's big time. Again, that's what we kind of started off with when I mentioned the Pacers. That's a big, gigantic, positive step forward.
For sure. Well, Craig, tell the people where they can find your work and follow you on social media. I know the new
Well, we're on
station
the
is
Space City Home Network.
right. Yeah,
Space City Home Network. You know what? I got to be honest. I messed that up for the first time in our open for the Miami game. I knew I was going to inevitably screw that up at least once, and I got too cool for school, and I went back into old habits. But Space City Home Network is the new home for both the Rockets and the Astros. So excited about that. And then on X, I guess is what everybody's saying now. Even though I'm not a big. I guess you don't even say tweet anymore. I'm not a big poster anymore, but you can find me there. Or is it CA_Rockets? But yeah, you'll see me all season long. We're doing every single game again this season on Space City Home Network. So super excited about that. I'm very excited about the season. And yeah, you're not the first person who has told me that this they're as excited about the start of the season as they've been in quite some time, and that's the case for me too. So I'm looking forward to Wednesday in Orlando and seeing how all this stuff shakes out.
I'm looking forward to hearing you do a great job on the Space City Home Network this season. Looking forward to that entire crew. It's going to be a fun season, a very important season as we talked about at the start. I'll catch up with you down the road to talk about
Yeah,
some of
for
the
sure.
see some of these predictions pay off
We'll see what happens, but I appreciate the time as always, my man.
for sure.